Hollywood loves to pretend that legends are forged from talent and light, but the truth lives in the shadows where the camera never turns. Because the brightest icons of the golden age carried on their bodies anomalies that no makeup room could fix and no director ever dared to acknowledge. Some stepped onto the stage with a dead eye, yet commanded the world with a gaze half real, half glass. Some wore a crown of hair so enormous it behaved like a living creature ready to collapse with a single turn of the head. Some possessed violet eyes so rare that modern science still labels them with one word: impossible. Others hid a broken ear, a war-torn scar, or a nose reshaped by poverty and street fights details that should have destroyed their careers, but instead carved them into legends. And now, it's time to open that door. 11 stories, 11 icons, 11 physical anomalies so extraordinary that even the spotlight had to tread carefully. Number 1, Diana Ross, a hair crown too wild to tame. Some performers step on stage and silence the whole room. Not because of glamorous clothes or lights or hours of preparation, but because they carry something that defies every aesthetic norm ever created. Diana Ross was one of those performers. Before she sang a note, before she even smiled, her hair spoke first. A vast, voluminous halo that moved like a living creature. It didn't just frame her face, it occupied the space around her like a shimmering aura no one dared touch. It was the first sign that this woman didn't belong to the same species as the rest of Hollywood. But keeping that beauty camera ready was a different story. One the audience never saw, one the press never wrote about because they preferred dresses, smiles, and billboard hits. They didn't know or pretended not to know that backstage Motown assigned an entire stylist team whose sole job was to tame that hair for months on end. And those stylists said they didn't style her hair, they negotiated with it. Her hair was so thick it reacted to room temperature, lighting angles, even humidity. That hair wasn't soft, it was powerful. It fought every law of normal human physics. Then came the lights where the real magic happened. Diana Ross's cheekbones were so high that light couldn't settle on her entire face. It bent, bounced, and shot outward, creating a razor-sharp outline around her profile. Someone on set once said, "She doesn't need a highlight. Her face already knows how to do it." Few people realized how different that bone structure was. Few knew her hair was so heavy, she once nearly lost her balance during a shoot. Few saw stylists using both hands and elbows to keep the curls in place, because Diana Ross never allowed anything, not even the truth of her own body, to come between her and a perfect moment on screen. Number 2, Sammy Davis Jr., a gaze half real, half glass in a world that saw only glamour. Some tragedies take place in darkness, yet leave a gleam that lasts a lifetime. For Sammy Davis Jr., that gleam sat right in the middle of his face, silent, cold, and unmoving, no matter what emotion he felt. It was a glass eye, something that accompanied him through almost his entire career. Had it not been for one fateful night in 1954, Sammy's life might have taken a different path, gentler, less painful, and perhaps less legendary. That night, while driving to Los Angeles after a performance, he got into a devastating car accident. A piece of metal from the steering wheel shot straight into his face, destroying his left eye. Newspapers at the time printed only a few cold lines: Sammy Davis Jr. severely injured. No one knew the damage was permanent. When he woke up in the hospital, half his world was gone. His family said he didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't blame anyone. He asked only one question: can I still dance? Not am I alive or can I still see? But the question of an artist whose life depended on every step, every head turn, every perfect glance into the camera. The doctor's answer was, "You'll have to learn everything again." And Sammy did more convincingly than anyone thought possible. He relearned how to walk so the audience wouldn't notice his missing field of vision. He learned to angle his head so the glass eye wouldn't catch stage lights. He spent hours in front of the mirror training the left side of his face not to betray the stiffness of the prosthetic. But some things couldn't be hidden. Stage lights always reflected differently in his two eyes, one alive, soulful, following the rhythm of every beat, one still glassy cold as unmoving water. Studios knew it. Directors knew it. Audiences living in a time before HD screens rarely noticed, but crew members understood this was the Rat Pack's greatest secret one. Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin guarded as fiercely as a part of their own bodies. During concerts lighting, crews had to adjust the left angle specifically for Sammy. Softer lights on that side ensured the glass eye didn't glare. In close-ups, cinematographers positioned him at a slight angle, avoiding a straight-on view that would drain emotion from the frame. Yet strangely, it was this flaw that made him unforgettable. When Sammy turned his head left, the light bounced off the glass surface, giving his eye a metallic glow, an effect no other performer could replicate. Some critics called it a gaze half-angel, half-machine, a look impossible to forget. Backstage, there were whispers that Sinatra once told him, "You're the only man I know who can turn a glass eye into a stage weapon." And he did. In ballads, his real eye carried all the sorrow, while the glass eye stayed still like a silent echo of pain. In upbeat numbers, he moved so fast no one could catch the asymmetry. Sammy never hid his eyes. He hid the reason it existed. In an era when Hollywood worshipped perfection like a commandment, Sammy Davis Jr. walked through life missing half a vision, yet turned that very absence into a pillar of his legend. One eye was gone. One eye was enough to see the light, and enough to make him immortal. Number 3, Marilyn Monroe, the secret beneath the perfect feet. If we had to choose one beauty icon the whole world simply assumes is incapable of having flaws, that name would always be Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn's beauty doesn't just belong to Hollywood. It belongs to human history. She stepped in front of the camera as if every light in existence had been created just for her. And because of that, no one, not even the people who worked closest to her, dared imagine that any part of Marilyn's body could be imperfect. But all of that was only true from the knees up, because behind the seductive photos, the immortal posters, and the high heels that became symbols of an era, was a secret Marilyn tried to hide her entire career. Her big toe was severely misaligned, essentially a serious case of hallux valgus, what most people today simply call a bunion. It sounds small, but in Marilyn's world, where every curve was magnified into legend, a deviation of just a few millimeters was enough to ruin an entire frame. The remaining behind-the-scenes photos, not the retouched images, not the studio-approved stills, show a much harsher truth. There are moments when Marilyn is resting between takes, shoes off her foot turned slightly to the right, and her big toe bends clearly to one side, forming a pronounced angle. Some photographers who worked with her said they always had to keep a scarf, a small cloth, or simply change her stance ready just to keep that crooked toe out of the shot. And the irony is the very high heels that turned her into a fashion icon were the same thing slowly destroying the shape of her feet. Marilyn often wore heels from 8 to 14 centimeters in most of her films, even backstage. Not because she liked it, but because her bosses, the studios, insisted. Simply because Marilyn looked best when she was standing on those unrealistic feet. No one asked if her feet hurt. Everyone just assumed this kind of beauty didn't feel pain. On his set, directors often asked her to stand with her legs slightly apart or with her knees turned inward, a signature pose that created the vulnerable aura the whole world adored. But that posture doubled the pressure on the joints in the front of her feet, making the deformity worse and worse. Doctors today, looking back at photos of Marilyn, generally agree she had severe hallux valgus, even with signs of inflammation and redness. But back then, no one cared about a star's health. They only cared that she appeared perfect on screen. There were photo shoots where Marilyn had to stand for more than an hour without moving just to maintain the exact curve the photographer wanted. And when she finally stepped down, her feet trembled slightly, a moment that never appeared in any official record. But it lives on in the memories of the people behind the camera. They were so blinded by her beauty, no one even let themselves imagine that her toes could be in pain. Hallux valgus didn't make Marilyn any less beautiful. On the contrary, it emphasizes something people often forget. Even Hollywood's most perfect symbol had to hold herself up on parts of the body that were very human, very real, and very fragile. In a rare interview, Marilyn once said, "I'm just like other women. I just try to stand where people want me to stand." It sounds simple, but for someone living with severe hallux valgus, standing where people want is sometimes the hardest thing in the world. And that is the cruel paradox of her legend. The world remembers Marilyn's beauty when she stood in high heels. But very few know that those very shoes deformed the part of her body she tried hardest to hide all her life. Number 4, Steve McQueen, the neck scar and the silence of an untouchable icon. People always said Steve McQueen embodied freedom, the motorcycle, the sun-squinting eyes, the jawline, sharp as a blade, the casual swagger of a man who walked as if the world were just scenery behind him. A man like that, cold, cocky, fearless, surely had no weakness. But McQueen carried a secret he hid all his life, a long scar on the right side of his neck. Not from a stunt, not from a crash, not from the rough childhood stories tabloids loved to exaggerate. It came from somewhere far less cinematic, a poor hospital back when he was a skinny, sickly boy suffering from tuberculosis and lung infection.